Some things happen quietly. Not the way silence is quiet, not the absence of sound, the other kind of quiet, the kind that arrives in the space between one breath and the next, the kind that carries more weight than any noise ever could. A whisper. 3 words. Said in the dark by someone who believed they were alone. I was not alone. I heard them. And everything, my careful life, my managed heart, the version of myself I had been maintaining with the determined precision of someone who has decided that control is the same thing as safety, everything came apart at the seams in the space of those 3 words. This is the story of what came before the whisper, what came after it, and what it meant to be the person who heard the thing that was never meant to be heard, and to understand in the hearing of it that you had been waiting for exactly that sound your entire life without knowing what you were waiting for. My name is Raphael. I was 28 years old. And the man who whispered in the dark was the person I had been carefully, deliberately, exhaustingly not falling in love with for 7 months. This is how it happened. I am a music teacher. Not a performer. I had been a performer briefly in my early 20s, the classical guitar training of my childhood in Miami producing a level of skill that had taken me to a conservatory in Boston, and then, when the performance career revealed itself to be something I was technically capable of but not emotionally built for, to a middle school music program in Atlanta, Georgia, where I had been teaching for 4 years. I loved teaching. This was not the consolation prize I had occasionally worried it might be. It was the thing itself. The specific joy of watching a 12-year-old understand rhythm for the first time, or hearing a student who had struggled for months suddenly produce something that resembled music. This was the thing I had been built for. The performance career had been someone else's idea of my future. The classroom was mine. My personal life was less resolved. I was gay, openly so, at work, in my friendships, in every context of my life. I had been out since I was 20, the coming out facilitated by a mother who had known since I was 14 and had been waiting patiently for me to figure it out myself. My Cuban-American family in Miami had reorganized around this information with varying degrees of grace and speed, and 5 years later the reorganization was largely complete, which was its own form of grace. I was openly gay, and I was, at 28, consistently single. Not for lack of opportunity, for the same reason that most people who are consistently single are consistently single. A combination of choosing wrong and then, after choosing wrong enough times, choosing not at all. The managed life, the careful heart. The decision that the risk of really loving someone was not one I was prepared to keep accepting. He arrived in September, 6 months into my 4th year at the school. New hire, science teacher, 7th grade, Korean American, 31 years old, transferred from a school in Nashville for reasons that were mentioned vaguely in the staff meeting that introduced him and not expanded upon. He was tall, with the kind of quiet that reads as reserve rather than coldness. He had a precise way of speaking, not formal but considered, the words chosen rather than produced automatically. He wore glasses that he took off when he was thinking about something difficult and put back on when he had reached a conclusion, which I noticed on the first day and filed as a detail for reasons I told myself were purely observational. He sat beside me at the staff meeting because the seat was available. He said, after the meeting, because I had asked a question about the school's music program budget that had not received a satisfying answer from the administration, that was a good question. It didn't get a good answer, I said. No, he said, but you asked it anyway, that matters. He walked to his classroom, I walked to mine. I thought about him for the rest of the afternoon. This was inconvenient. We became friends with the specific organic ease of 2 people whose daily proximity produces familiarity and whose genuine compatibility turns familiarity into something more substantial. We had lunch at the same table most days, which began as convenience and became habit and then became something that I noticed on the days it did not happen. We talked about our students with the honest assessments of teachers who care, not the institutional language of professional development but the real talk. The what do I do about this kid who is brilliant and being failed by every system designed to serve him talk. We had, I discovered over months, significant overlap in the things we cared about. Music and the science of sound. He had read extensively about acoustics and resonance and the physics of how music works, which produced conversations that crossed our professional boundaries in a way I found genuinely exciting. Literature. The specific experience of being second-generation American, navigating between the cultural world of parents who came from somewhere else, and the country that was fully yours but sometimes felt borrowed. The complicated love of family that is neither simple nor uncomplicated but is, in the end, the love you have. I learned things about Owen over 7 months. He had left Nashville because of a relationship that had ended badly enough to require a full relocation. He did not say this directly. He said the job opportunity was good and the change felt right, but the edges of it were visible in the way that things are visible when someone is being honest in all but the specific detail. He cooked, seriously, deliberately, the way he did everything. He had learned from his grandmother, who had come from Busan and who had taught him that food was the most direct form of love available to human beings. He had been, I understood gradually, hurt in the way that people are hurt when they have loved someone who did not love them well. The careful reserve was not native to him, it was acquired. The protection of someone who had learned that openness produced consequences they had not been prepared for. I recognized this because I wore a version of it myself. Two people in the same armor, recognizing each other's armor and choosing both of them separately, simultaneously, not to mention it. The 7 months were a sustained exercise in not saying the thing. I was in love with him by November. By December I had acknowledged this to myself in the privacy of my own interior, with the specific reluctant acceptance of someone who has been trying to avoid a conclusion that has become unavoidable. By February I had told exactly one person, my best friend Camille, who had been waiting for me to say it, and responded with the specific unsurprised satisfaction of someone whose patience has been vindicated. Finally she said, "It doesn't matter," I said, "I'm not going to do anything about it." "Why not?" "Because he's my colleague, because we're friends and I don't want to ruin that, because I don't know if he's—" I stopped. "Gay," Camille said. "I don't know anything about his relationship history," I said, "I don't know." "Raphael," Camille said, "I have seen you describe this man for 4 months, I know what I'm hearing." "You're hearing me talk about a friend." "I'm hearing you talk about someone you're in love with," she said. "The question is what you're going to do about it." "Nothing," I said. "That's always your answer," she said. "It's always the right answer," I said. It was not always the right answer. I was about to find out what the right answer actually was. The annual 7th grade overnight field trip to the State Science Center had been on the school calendar since September. It was a 3-hour bus ride, 2 days, one overnight in the center's dormitory-style accommodation, 4 teachers attending: Owen, myself, the social studies teacher Diane, and the PE teacher Marcus. I had agreed to attend in October, before the November realization, before the December acknowledgement, before the February conversation with Camille. By March, the agreement was a commitment I honored because backing out would have required an explanation I did not have. The bus ride out was easy. The students were excited in the way that 12-year-olds are excited about anything that involves not being in school, which produces an energy that is both exhausting and, in honest moments, delightful. Owen sat across the aisle from me, and we talked over the seat backs about a student named Jordan who had recently discovered a talent for biology that was transforming his experience of school. The center was extraordinary. 2 days of hands-on science education that produced in 32 7th graders the specific animated engagement that you spend a career trying to generate in a regular classroom. Owen in his professional element was something I had seen before and had not allowed myself to fully observe. He taught with a patience and a genuine enthusiasm that was not performed. He loved the subject. It was visible. The students responded to it the way students always respond to a teacher who is actually present in what they are doing. I watched him explain resonance to a group of 12-year-olds using a series of tuning forks and water glasses, and I felt, in the intersection of his subject and mine, the specific warmth of someone whose world has just been enlarged by another person. The overnight. The dormitory accommodation was basic: 2 rooms for students separated by gender per school policy, 2 rooms for teachers, 4 cots, Owen and Marcus in one room, Diane and I in another. This is not how the whisper happened. The whisper happened at 2 in the morning. When I could not sleep and went to the common room for water and found Owen already there. He was sitting in the chair near the window with a glass of water and his phone face down on the armrest and his glasses off and his face with the expression it had when he was thinking about something difficult. He had not heard me come in. I should have said something immediately. I was aware of this. The polite thing, the simple thing, was to say his name and announce my presence and get my water and either stay or go. I did not do the simple thing. Because he looked in the dark common room with the window behind him showing the clear March night and the stars that were visible away from the city, he looked unlike anything I had seen before. Not different from himself, more himself. The reserve that he wore in shared daylight spaces had been set aside with his glasses. Whatever he was thinking about in the dark, he was thinking about it without the careful management. He was beautiful. I had known this for 7 months in the way you know something you are not allowing yourself to act on. But in the common room at 2 in the morning, I knew it without the management, and it was, as honest things tend to be, larger than the managed version. I reached for the water pitcher. It was on the counter 3 feet from where I had entered. I was quiet. He did not look up. I stood with my water glass, and I should have spoken, and I did not, and a silence extended that was not uncomfortable because he did not know it was shared. And then he did something I had not expected. He picked up his phone. He looked at it, some image or message or something that I could not see from where I stood. He put it back down, face down. And he said something. Not to me. He did not know I was there. He said it to the room, to the window, to the night outside it, in the voice that people use when they believe they are entirely alone and are thinking aloud the thing they cannot say in company. He whispered 3 words. I love him. The water glass in my hand was very cold. The room was very still. He was still looking at the window, at the night, at whatever he was seeing that was not the room around him. And I was 3 feet away, not breathing, holding water I had forgotten I was holding, with 3 words rearranging everything inside me that I had spent 7 months carefully arranging. I love him. 3 words, whispered to a room he believed was empty. I did not know yet if he meant me. I did not know yet what I was going to do, but I knew one thing with the absolute certainty of someone who has just heard an irreversible truth: everything had changed. In the dark, in a whisper, everything. I went back to my room. Carefully, silently, the way you move when you are carrying something fragile, and the fragility is not the thing in your hands but the thing in your chest. I lay on the cot in the dark, and I listened to Diane's steady breathing and the building settling around me and the specific silence of a night that has been altered by 3 words spoken into it. I love him. The question that followed immediately, that would follow me for the next 48 hours with the persistence of something that needed answering: who was him? I was not arrogant enough to assume. Owen had a life before Atlanta, a relationship in Nashville that had required a full relocation to leave, a history I had not been given the entirety of, the phone he had looked at before the whisper could have held anything, anyone. But the 7 months, the lunches, the conversations that crossed into territories that proximity alone did not account for, the way he looked at me sometimes, and I had noticed this, had filed it as something I did not want to examine, with the specific attention of someone who was trying to understand more than the surface of a thing. The way he had said that was a good question on the very first day, not as flattery, as recognition. I did not sleep. At 6 in the morning, I rose and went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror with the specific assessment of someone who has been awake all night with a question and has arrived, by dawn, at a position. I was not going to ask him directly. Not yet, not here. Not in this building with 32 12-year-olds and 2 colleagues and the bus ride home and the school hallways and all the ordinary architecture of the life that would continue regardless of what 3 whispered words meant. I was going to pay attention. Differently than before, without the management, I was going to let myself see what was actually there and respond to what I saw. That was the decision made in the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning after a sleepless night. It was, as it turned out, the right decision. He sat across the aisle again. The students were tired in the specific deflated way of children who have exhausted their enthusiasm and are now simply waiting to be returned to their regular lives. The bus was quieter than the outbound journey. Several students slept. Owen and I talked. Not differently on the surface, the same easy back and forth that 7 months had established, but I was watching differently without the management, and what I saw was this. He looked at me more than the conversation required. Not the glance of someone tracking a dialogue, the other kind, the kind that lingers a fraction past the moment it is needed, the kind that is checking something more than whether you are following what is being said. And when our conversation paused, when we both looked out the window at the Georgia landscape moving past, the particular green of early March with winter not quite finished, he did not fill the silence. He let it be, and in the letting it be he stayed present in it, with me, in a shared quiet that was neither awkward nor meaningless. I had been in that silence with him many times and had not let myself read it. I read it now. By the time the bus reached the school parking lot, I had enough. Not certainty, I did not have certainty, but enough. Enough to do the thing I had been not doing for 7 months. I did not act immediately. This is important because the whisper was not a certainty, it was a possibility. And the difference between those two things when it comes to the heart of someone you care about is everything. I spent the week paying attention in the way I had decided to pay attention, watching without managing what I saw, letting myself feel the things I had been not feeling. On Tuesday, he brought me coffee. He did this occasionally. He walked past the coffee cart near the main office on his way to his classroom, and sometimes he brought two. He set it on my desk with the specific note that said "You're regular" because he knew my regular had learned it the way he learned things, through quiet observation rather than direct asking. I looked at the cup. "You're regular." He knew my regular. On Wednesday, we were both in the copy room after school and the copier jammed and we fixed it together, which involved both of us on our knees with the paper drawer open. And he was close enough that I could smell his jacket, something clean and warm, the specific scent of someone whose proximity you have been cataloging without permission. And when the paper came free and we both sat back on our heels and looked at each other, he smiled. Not the professional smile, the other one, the one that arrived without management. On Thursday, I was playing guitar after school in the music room, just playing, working through a piece I had been learning, the door open in the absent way of someone who has forgotten to close it, and he appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, listening. "Don't stop," he said, when I noticed him and my hand stilled. "I wasn't performing," I said, "I was just." "I know," he said, "that's why it was good." He came in, he sat in one of the student chairs near the front. "Keep going." I kept going. He stayed for 20 minutes, he did not speak. He listened the way he did everything, with full attention, without performance. And when the piece ended, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "I didn't know you played like that." "I don't usually play like that," I said, "not for people." "Why not?" I thought about the honest answer. "Because playing like that requires not caring whether someone is watching," I said, "and I usually care." He looked at me across the music room in the Thursday after-school light. "You didn't care tonight," he said. "No," I said, "I didn't." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he stood up, he picked up his bag, at the door he stopped. "Raphael," he said. "Yeah." A pause, the longest pause of the 7 months. "Can I take you to dinner?" he said, not as not colleagues, not as he stopped, reorganized. "I'd like to take you to dinner." The music room, the Thursday light, the guitar in my lap. "Yes," I said, without hesitation, without management, without the careful calculation of what it meant and what the risk was and whether the friendship could survive the attempt. "Just yes." He nodded once. The expression on his face was the one I had seen in the common room at 2 in the morning, the one without the reserve. "Saturday," he said, "I'll text you." He went. I sat in the music room with my guitar and I felt the specific physical sensation of someone who has been holding their breath for 7 months and has just, finally, exhaled. He took me to a Korean restaurant in the Decatur neighborhood that he had been going to since he moved to Atlanta. The kind of restaurant that is not performing anything, no ambient design, no curated atmosphere, just food made by people who know exactly what they are doing and have been doing it long enough that confidence has become simplicity. We ordered, he spoke to the server in Korean briefly, and the server's response suggested they knew him, which meant he came here enough to be remembered. "Your grandmother's influence?" I asked. He looked at me. "I mentioned her," he said, surprised, not that I remembered that I had connected it. "You mentioned she taught you to cook," I said. "That food was the most direct form of love. I figured a restaurant you love is connected to that." He looked at me for a moment. "She died 2 years ago," he said. "This restaurant, the food here is the closest I've found to hers." A pause. "I come here when I miss her." I held this. "I'm glad you brought me here," I said. "That means something." "I know it does," he said, simply, directly, the words landing with the weight of someone who has decided that simplicity is the only available honesty. The food arrived and it was extraordinary. We ate and we talked and the restaurant filled around us and the specific quality of an evening that is what it was always going to be settled around the table. At some point he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," I said. The overnight trip, the common room at 2 in the morning. Everything in me went still. "You were there," he said, "it was not a question." "Yes," I said. A silence. "What did you hear?" he asked. The question, direct, with the specific courage of someone who has decided that the truth is the only available currency. "3 words," I said. He looked at his hands on the table, then at me. "Did you know they were about you?" he said. I hoped, I said, "I didn't know." He looked at me. "They were about you," he said. "They've been about you since November." A pause, probably before November. I felt something in my chest. The specific rearrangement of something that has been braced for a long time and is now allowed to release. "Owen," I said. "Yeah. I have been not falling in love with you for 7 months," I said, with significant effort and limited success. Something crossed his face, the something that arrives when you have been hoping for a specific thing and it arrives exactly as you hoped. "Limited success," he said. "Very limited," I said, "as of March." He looked at me across the table in the Korean restaurant in Decatur with the food between us and the warm evening around us and the 7 months of carefully managed distance finally, formally, over. "I wasn't going to say anything," he said. "I thought," he stopped. "After Nashville I decided that the risk of saying something was not worth taking, that a friendship with you was worth more than a declaration that might not be returned," I said. "Yes. I made the same calculation," I said, "same conclusion." "What changed?" he asked. "I heard you," I said, "in the dark, when you thought you were alone." I looked at him, and I realized that the thing I was most afraid of losing was already the thing I wanted most, and those two facts together made the calculation different. He was very still. "You heard me," he said. "Yes. And you didn't say anything, not that night, not the next day." "I needed to be sure," I said, "not of what you said, of what I was going to do about it." "And now you're sure." "Now I'm sure," I said. He reached across the table. He put his hand on mine. And the restaurant continued around us and the evening continued and the 7 months of carefully managed distance became something else. Something new. Something that had been building toward this table and this hand and these 3 words finally said in the light rather than whispered in the dark. We sat in that restaurant for 3 hours. We talked about Nashville and Miami and the relationships that had taught us both the wrong lessons about what love was supposed to cost. We talked about the school and the students and the Thursday music room and the coffee cart and all the small accumulated dailiness of 7 months that had been, we now understood, something other than friendship all along. And when we finally left, walking into the Atlanta night with the spring air warm and the city lit and his hand finding mine on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, I thought about the whisper, about the dark room, about 3 words said to no one. And I understood something I had not understood before. Sometimes the truest things get said when we believe no one is listening. And sometimes the person who needs to hear them most is already there, already in the room, already listening. Already changed by the sound of them. Atlanta in April is a specific argument for the decision to live in the American South. The dogwoods, the wisteria, the specific quality of warmth that arrives after a Georgia winter, not dramatic, not sudden but generous, the way a long-awaited thing is generous when it finally comes. The city softening at its edges, the parks filling, the light lengthening in the way that makes every afternoon feel like a gift. Owen and I were, in the language of a relationship, finding its footing together. Not announced, not performed. The school was the school and we were both clear-eyed about the specific complexity of a workplace relationship and had agreed, without lengthy discussion because neither of us required it, that discretion was the right practice and that discretion was not secrecy and that the difference mattered. We told the people who mattered. Camille first, on a Sunday morning over the phone, her response exactly what I expected from a person whose patience had been exhausted by months of my careful management. Finally she said, "You said that when I told you I was in love with him," I said. "I said it then about the acknowledgement," she said. "I'm saying it now about the action." Owen told his friend David in Nashville, who apparently responded with similar relief that the Atlanta relocation had produced something better than professional advancement. The days in April had a different quality than the days before March. Not because the structure changed. We were still at the same school, still at the same lunch table, still in the easy professional proximity that 7 months had established. But the quality of it was different. The way music played in a resonant space is different from the same music played in an acoustic void. The resonance. The sense that something was reflecting back. I played guitar differently in April. Not better, the technical standard was what it was, but differently. The way you play when someone is in the room who hears what you are actually doing rather than what you are performing. Owen came to the music room on Thursday afternoons with the regularity of someone who has been given standing invitation and has accepted. He sat in the student chair near the front. He listened. He did not speak during the playing, and afterward he said things that were not compliments in the social sense but responses in the actual sense, which was worth more than any compliment. That section in the middle, he said one Thursday, the tempo change. What were you thinking about? You, I said without planning to. He looked at me. The section before it, he said, sounded like 7 months of being careful. The tempo change is when you stopped. I looked at him in the Thursday music room light. That's the most accurate musical analysis I've ever received, I said, from a science teacher. I told you, he said, I've read about resonance. May. Every relationship that is real has the harder conversation, the one that cannot be indefinitely postponed, the one that requires both people to be more honest than comfort allows. Ours was about Nashville. Not the city, what had happened there, the relationship that had required a full relocation to leave. He told me on a Saturday evening in my apartment. We had cooked, he had cooked, I had assisted and mostly stayed out of his way in the way that watching a skilled person work sometimes requires, and we were at my kitchen table with the aftermath of dinner and the Atlanta evening doing what Atlanta evenings do in May. His name had been Aaron, 4 years. They had met in graduate school and built a life that was real and good at the beginning, and then in the specific gradual way of things that stop working had become something smaller than either of them. Not dramatic, not a crisis, the slower failure, the one that is harder to leave because it does not announce itself loudly enough to make leaving obvious. Why did you stay as long as you did? I asked. Because I wanted to understand and because understanding required asking. The same reason people stay in things that don't fit, he said, the fear that the alternative is being alone, he looked at his hands, and the fear that if it didn't work with Aaron, who was a good person who cared about me, then maybe the problem was me. It wasn't you, I said. I know that now, he said. I didn't know it when I left Nashville. He paused. I moved here and I was careful about everything because careful felt like the lesson Nashville was teaching me. But careful isn't the lesson, I said. No, he said, I think the lesson is the difference between careful and closed. He looked at me. I was closed. For 18 months after Nashville I was closed, and then I met you, and being closed required more effort than it ever had before. Why, I asked. Because you played guitar when you thought no one was watching, he said. Because you asked the question at the staff meeting that didn't get a good answer. Because you talked about your students the way people talk about things they love. He paused. Because you were the realest person I had encountered in 18 months of being very careful not to encounter anyone real. I looked at him across my kitchen table in May. Owen, I said. Yeah. The phone, I said. In the common room, you were looking at something before the whisper. He was quiet. A photo, he said, of you from the Winterfield trip in December. Someone had taken a group photo and you were in it, and he stopped. I had been looking at it and thinking about what I wasn't letting myself say, and then I said it, to a room I thought was empty. I held this. I'm glad I was there, I said. So am I, he said, terrified in retrospect but glad. You don't have to be terrified, I said, not with me. He looked at me with the gray eyes that had taken their glasses off and the reserve that had been, over the months of April and May, progressively and genuinely setting itself down. I'm learning that, he said. You make it easy. You make it easy, I said. You just don't know it yet. School ended in June. The summer had a different geography than the academic year. Without the structure of the school day, the shared lunch table, the Thursday music room, the relationship had to find its shape in open time rather than the container of a working week. It found its shape well. He taught me to cook his grandmother's doenjang jjigae. I taught him the basic chords of classical guitar. These were not equivalent exchanges in terms of skill complexity. The soup required years of instinct that I would not develop in one lesson, and guitar is not something that yields quickly to adult beginners. But the teaching was not really about the skills. It was about the showing, the making yourself visible in the specific way that teaching someone something you love requires, the vulnerability of caring about something enough to share it and accepting the inevitable imperfection of the sharing. He was patient with my guitar instruction, I was patient with his soup. We drove to Miami in July. He had not met my family. This was the introduction that I had thought about with the specific anxiety of someone who loves their family and loves another person and is aware that the meeting of those two things is irreducible in its significance. My mother, Alina, opened the door and looked at Owen and then at me and then back at Owen, and she said in Spanish, which she did when something was real to her, "Est es él." This is the one. I translated this for Owen later. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother knew in 30 seconds, he said. My mother has known everything about me since I was 14, I said. She has 30 years of pattern recognition. He laughed, the laugh that I had been cataloging since September, which arrived rarely and took over his face completely and was the best thing I had seen directed at anything in years. My family in Miami was the specific warm chaos of a Cuban-American household that takes feeding people seriously and asking questions even more seriously. My aunts and my cousin Marco and my grandmother, who was 83 and sharp, and who looked at Owen across the dinner table and said, in her direct way, "You are the reason he sounds different on the phone." Owen looked at her. "How does he sound different?" he asked. "Like someone who remembers he is happy," she said. In August, before school started again, we went back. Not for the field trip, that was March, but the State Science Center was open to the public in summer and I had suggested it, and Owen had looked at me and understood exactly what I meant and said yes. We walked through the exhibits with the particular quality of adults in a place designed for children, unhurried, able to look at things fully, freed from the management of 32 12-year-olds. We found the common room. It was smaller than I remembered. Common rooms always are when you return to them outside of the moment that made them significant, just a room, a window, some chairs. But we stood in it in the August afternoon, and it was still the room where 3 words had changed everything, and the smallness did not reduce that. "Show me where you were standing," he said. I moved to the spot, near the counter, 3 feet from the chair by the window. He sat in the chair, not performing, just completing the picture, seeing it from the inside. "You could hear me clearly," he said. "Very clearly," I said. He looked at the window, the same window, August light instead of March dark. "What would you have done," he said, "if the words had not been about you?" I had thought about this, in the months since, in the spaces between everything that had happened. "Gone back to bed," I said, "let you have your privacy, never said anything," a pause, and spent the rest of my life wondering. He looked at me. "I'm glad they were about you," he said. "I'm glad you said them," I said, "even accidentally, even to a room you thought was empty." "Especially then," he said, "because I never would have said them any other way, not then, not for months more." He paused. "You heard the thing I couldn't say out loud." "Sometimes that's how it happens," I said. "The truest things get said when we think no one is listening," he said. "And sometimes the person who needs to hear them is already there," I said. He stood up from the chair. He crossed the 3 feet of distance. He stood in front of me in the common room in August with the window behind him showing an afternoon that was warm and clear and completely ordinary, and completely extraordinary in the way that all ordinary things become extraordinary when you are in them with the right person. He put his hands on my face. "Raphael," he said. "Yeah. I love you," said in the light, clearly, directly, not to an empty room, to me. The whisper made whole. "I love you too," I said. "I have since November, probably before." "Probably before," he agreed. And we stood in the room where it had started, in the light instead of the dark, with the words said finally at the volume they deserved, and the August afternoon continued around us, and the Science Center continued, and the world continued with its ordinary, extraordinary persistence. And everything was different. Everything had been different since March. Since a common room and a glass of water, and a man who thought he was alone. Since 3 words whispered in the dark. School started again. The same hallways, the same lunch table, the same Thursday music room with the door open and the guitar and the student chairs. The same coffee cart near the main office that sometimes produced 2 cups when one would have been sufficient. The same and completely different. The staff meeting on the first day of school, new teachers introduced, the routine of a new year establishing itself. Owen across the table, his glasses on, his notepad open, his expression professional and present. He looked at me once across the table. The smallest thing, a look, a fraction of a second. But it carried 7 months of friendship and the March common room and a Korean restaurant in Decatur and Miami in July, and the August afternoon in the room where it started, and all the daily accumulated evidence of a love that had been building since the first day, and had been named in a whisper before it was ready to be spoken. It carried all of that in a fraction of a second. I held it. After the meeting, walking to our classrooms, he said, "Good question, by the way." I looked at him. "What question?" "The one you asked," he said, "about the music program budget." "I asked that question last year," I said, "first day, same meeting." "I know," he said, "it still didn't get a good answer." "No," I said. "But you asked it anyway," he said, "that still matters." He went to his classroom. I went to mine. And I stood at my door for a moment with the Atlanta September morning coming through the hallway windows and the sound of students arriving and the school year beginning, and the love that had started with one whispered sentence in a dark room now fully, daily, durably present. Not whispered. Not hidden. Real. The way the true things are always real when you stop being afraid to say them at full volume. In the light. To the person who is already there. Already listening. Already changed by the sound of your voice. He whispered 3 words in the dark to a room he believed was empty. I was in the room, I heard them, and everything, my careful heart, my managed life, the 7 months of not falling in love with him became the story of how I arrived at the moment of hearing them. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the thing that will change everything. They imagine it arriving loudly, dramatically, with full announcement, but the thing that changed my life came quietly. 3 words, a whisper, a dark room. A glass of water I had forgotten I was holding. The truest things I have learned do not always arrive with ceremony. Sometimes they arrive in the dark when someone is talking to themselves. And sometimes you are already there and the only thing left to do is listen, and then when the time comes to say the true thing back, out loud, in the light, without whispering, because the person you love deserves to hear it at full volume, and you deserve to say it that way, finally, without fear. At the volume your love actually is.